Today, we have a great show. With us now is Robert Cahaly. He is a senior strategist. He founded the acclaimed Trafalgar Group, which is a polling, opinion, and market survey company. Trafalgar was one of the few polling organizations to correctly predict the outcome of the 2016 presidential elections, and they were also among the most accurate pollsters in 2020. Robert, it's a pleasure to have you here with us again. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome back to Better for America.
Well, it's great to be here. Looking forward to this year's elections and kind of covering some of these questions today.
So are we. I mean, you said it right. AMAC partnered up with you, Robert, that is the Trafalgar Group, to conduct a poll that was deployed beyond AMAC membership to find out what every demographic in America thinks. And we asked them, do you feel the Biden administration cares more or less about the middle class than the previous administrations? Now, I thought this interesting. 51.5% rather, of respondents answered much less, compared to 3% who said somewhat less, 11.4% said somewhat more, and only 31% said much more. The intensity of the public's alienation, I think, would be alarming for any president, but for a leader whose entire campaign was based solely on empathy, I think it's even more disturbing. So I wanted to ask you, Robert, through your data, which issues specifically do you feel have driven people to the point of such extreme disapproval for President Joe Biden? In other words, which issue is hitting Americans the hardest?
Well, when it comes to him looking out for the middle class, it is most definitely the economy and inflation, because that's where we have the departure from the White House at the beginning, talking about inflation was an issue for the rich, to just basically the ancillary way that they've looked at it, like, just the idea they've never treated it like the 4-alarm fire that families believe it to be. When they want to see a president with his hair on fire and angry, and this guy's just too laid back. Laid back is awesome when, you're kind of feeling like, all right, some of these guys were like, they want less intensity than Trump, but laid back when the house is on fire is something altogether different. And now is not the time to be sitting around eating ice cream. And that makes them feel like, as Bill Clinton used to say, he can feel their pain. That says, I can't feel your pain.
Interesting, very interesting. And we're seeing the poll numbers are really tightening, not just in the Trafalgar polls, but in other polls, like this recent Fox 29 Insider Advantage poll that shows how Dr. Oz is really neck and neck with Fetterman. I wanted to ask you, how likely do you think it will be that Oz wins that race?
I think it's going to be a tight race, and part of what Oz is suffering from is the mainstream Republican establishment's unwillingness to get behind Mastriano. If they had given him the same level of support they've given the other Republican nominees, Oz would already be up. But it is very difficult. This ticket splitting is not as simple as people think it is. And once people are kind of on one side, it's hard to get them, to ticket split. And so I think the disproportionate amount of support that Oz is getting and that Mastriano is not getting basically hurts the two of them together. It is possible to win, but I think what we're seeing now is the governor's race closing a little bit. And for every point the governor's race closes, I think that's a point that Oz does better. And I noticed today, even CBS's new poll has Oz just behind by 2 points. And when you've got mainstream media saying you're behind by only 2 points, that bodes well to probably being a tie or better. But so, it really is going to be very tight. It's going to come down to it. I think tonight's debate is also very fateful. What we saw the most on this race is it kind of turned, that Lee Atwater used to talk about defining moments. And I feel like from the feedback I've gotten, that imagery of those kids coming into that Huawei and just trashing it, just kind of like things are out of control. There's a level of lawlessness and out of control that's just, it's not acceptable with, all in law enforcement areas. And so it was a perfect contrast to Oz is saying we should get tough and Fetterman's record of being very soft.
You know, Robert, your surveys have displayed incredible precision time and time again, and you've really maintained a prominent reputation by combating common biases, which is one of them is called the social desirability bias, which is the tendency of survey respondents to answer questions in a manner that might be viewed as favorably by others. I know that you won your reputation as the most accurate pollster because you realized that some MAGA voters were afraid to tell a pollster their real views.
Well, like discussed it is in 2016, you had shy Trump voters. If you kind of poked around about it, they would eventually give you enough clues as to where they were. If you ask how their neighbors were voting, but that was mainly just, you only caught that bias really on the live call, because the live call is where the social desirability bias is most felt. But whether it's any kind of a digital collection methods, there would be a lot less of it. So it was a great kind of compare to see what the difference was, and so to help recognize social desirability. By 2020, in the midst of cancel culture, Republicans were just reluctant to take polls, so you had to work extra hard to find the type of Republicans that were going to vote for Trump. Now, the kind that would, the never Trump Republicans couldn't wait to take a poll. So if you weren't careful, you could overestimate their significance. They were never more than like 10 or 12% of Republican vote, but in some surveys, they represented 30% of the vote because they just didn't know they should be digging deeper. And 2022 is different. After Biden's speech, basically, saying that MAGA voters were a threat to America, and the revelations that the FBI was working with the tech companies, and people are hearing stuff about the banks are being pressured by the government to tell them who's buying guns. It is not illogical, and many have jumped to the conclusion of maybe the polling data is going to be turned over to the government. Maybe they're monitoring it. Maybe the polls aren't even real, and they're just trying to collect a list of MAGA voters. That's what they're telling us, and it doesn't matter whether it's real. It matters whether they think it's real. And there's a certain number of voters who really are convinced that may be happening. We had 6 people since the Biden speech reach out to us and say, hey, I got this poll. It was strange. It says it's from you, but I don't know whether it's really from you, so I didn't answer it. I'm just asking you. In every case, it was us. But the suspicion of that never happened in the history of the company, that we'd have people say, I got a poll, which it was you. And it happened 6 times since Biden's speech. That is more than a coincidence. And people are frankly scared, the ones that tell us, hey, I don't want to take polls because I just don't know. I'm worried they're building a list to go after. So these guys, what I'm saying now is, people who used to put a sign on their yard, put a sticker on their car, take polls, comment on social media, talk to their friends about politics, they're out. They're submerged. They're not saying a word to anybody. I tell people all the time, you could have a conservative next door and you'd never know it. But they're going to vote. And that's the only way they can scratch that itch.
That's right.
Because they have no other way to talk about it, but they're going to vote.
Sure. I mean, when your head's on a swivel, you're looking behind you to make sure you're safe. When you have a president who tells you that you're a dangerous, terrorist, for lack of better words. I mean, he really is that's what our president is saying. That's what he's trying to convince those people who support America First policies. So it's no wonder that people might feel hesitant to speak up when we see what's happening. The public confidence in our institutions such as the FBI is at an all-time low. And we see what the media is doing too. They're using really any excuse to convince the public that the left is still the loud majority, when in fact I think they're the loud minority. Even the New York Times wrote an article called, "Yes, the polling warning signs are flashing again." Can you take a listen here to this video?
A postmortem on the 2020 presidential election by the American Association for Public Opinion Research found that national polling had the worst magnitude of error in 40 years. And the state polls were the worst in at least 2 decades, and they couldn't provide any definitive reason as to why. And it was worse than 2016, when pollsters systematically underestimated Donald Trump's strength against Hillary Clinton. Nate Cohn drilled down on the recent polling showing that Democrats are making gains in the Senate and found that the candidates are, quote, outrunning expectations in the same places where the polls overestimated Mr. Biden in 2020 and Mrs. Clinton in 2016. Cohn further notes that if this failure occurs, it will be because most pollsters haven't made significant changes to their methodology since the last cycle.
So, Robert, they caution that the polls that we are seeing from the midterms are likely inaccurate. What do you make of the media's dismissal of polling accuracy?
Well, I think that might even be the show where they interviewed me. I was on Michael Smirkani's show about this subject, so I'm not sure that was it or it was another week, because he did make note of the fact that we were one of the ones that was not caught up among that crowd. And yeah, it's easy to dismiss the whole group of pollsters and to, marginalize just a few of us. But the fact is, when you look at 2020 and these guys' error rate was in the 4 and 5, we were the lowest one of any polling company that polled all the major races. We were number one. And, our error rate of the past 3 cycles when everybody else has been kind of falling apart is the lowest of anybody. So it is not lost on us. These people really don't know how to poll people in a modern world. And part of that is a very simple thing. These long questionnaires, they lose average people. And they overestimate college-educated people with no more disposable time who take those long polls. And they don't give people lots of different methods to participate. And therefore, that they're just kind of out of step. Some of them are just live calls only, and they don't, even consider the fact that millennials and Gen Zs don't even answer the phone. Some of them are just ridiculously long, and they're also small sample sizes, 400 and 500. We never poll a state with less than 1,000. So it's just, I always use an example of banks. At some point, when in the modern era, they said, all right, some people want to come into the branch, some people want to go to the ATM, some people take a picture and do it through the mobile app, and some will talk on the phone. But they built banking services to accommodate people's need for privacy and their understanding of technology to give everybody an ability to participate in a way they were comfortable. Why is the polling industry not caught up with that? We have.
Very interesting point. And we're glad that you have. And so we're continuing to watch your polls. Really exciting stuff. Our listeners can check out amac.us because we have a slew of articles there, recent polling, that reveals so much to us. Things like Hispanics are fed up with gender, lunacy is what I call it, really the indoctrination of our children in schools, and over 68% of Democrats are against that. I think that's going to be a driving issue, that crime, among other things, the economy you mentioned earlier, Robert. I want to ask you about what you see for the future. Specifically, do you have hope for the future, as I do? Last year, I asked you what you thought lay in store for America in 2022, and you predicted that our appearance on the world stage would be the driving factor for people to vote in the midterms. People want to be proud of their country, and no one wants to support an administration that is making their country seem weak. So much has happened within the year. So what do you see now as some of the main factors that will drive people to the polls this November? And what do you see happening in the House and Senate?
Well, I think what you have is, and the feedback we get is that there's this overall, and this is not some highbrow role of government discussion, but this overall thought among the public of the government is concerned about a list of things that I'm not as a voter. And the things that I'm worried about, the government doesn't seem concerned about. People are worried about what their children are being taught in schools. People are worried about fentanyl coming across the border and the border in general. People are worried about, is it safe to go to the grocery store after dark? People are worried about it. I'm not getting as much out of my dollar. The price of gas, the price of bread. These are things they're worried about. What the average voter is not worried about is January 6th, climate change, transgender rights, woke military, just like go through the list of things. And so it's like people are saying, wait a minute, why are the things that I care about not at the top of the government's list? Why is there such a disconnect? For those of us who remember the old Super Friends, there was this bizarro world where everything was backward. And that's kind of like what this feels like. It's like everything is backward, almost to the point of being inverse, like it's absurd. And we get that feedback from so
Yeah.
many people.
I've been saying that since the beginning, since Biden took office. I've been literally rather using that word, saying things just don't feel right. So do you think, Robert, that we're looking at a Republican House and Senate? Do you think there's a chance that the Senate, based on your polling, especially in those states that everyone's focusing on, do you think that that Republicans may just win both chambers?
I think it's distinctly possible. I think more than likely, I hate to say it, believe it or not, we're still, at this point, a few weeks out. Anything can happen in a few weeks. We've seen how
Yes.
quickly elections can move, especially when they're this close. But I will say, if this election were next Tuesday, I would tell you that Republicans are probably going to win north of 25 to 30 House seats and at least 51 Senate seats. And I think unless something major happens, unless Putin does something crazy or Biden does, unless something nutty happens, you're probably looking at the situation getting better, not worse, in the next couple of weeks for Republicans.
Absolutely interesting. We'll be watching very, very closely, and we would love to have you back again after election. Robert, it was an absolute pleasure having you with us today. Your persistence in deploying fair and honest polls throughout the country is so widely appreciated. Thank you for all that you're doing.
Well, thank you for all that y'all do and getting the word out and being such a strong voice for the values that you're standing for, and a contrast to some of those who are working with the same group of people in the wrong direction.
Robert, thank you. And I want to thank each and every one of you AMACers out there listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can listen to more just like it. Head to our YouTube channel or visit us at bfapodcast.us. You can also listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, or by downloading our free AMAC News app. And don't forget to follow us wherever you are on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Have a wonderful evening.